In the beginning, the sky and the earth were one body pressed together so tightly that nothing between them could breathe. Ouranos, the sky, lay over Gaia, the earth, without ever lifting himself away. Every child Gaia bore was immediately pushed back inside her by Ouranos, shoved back into the darkness of the womb before it could draw its first breath in the world above. Not out of malice, the oldest sources suggest, but out of fear. Ouranos looked at his children and saw what they were, the Titans, enormous and ancient, full of power that had no ceiling, and he kept them inside because a father who cannot control his children can try to delay them instead. Gaia endured this for longer than any human measure of time can hold. Then she made a plan. She fashioned a sickle from gray flint, the hardest stone she could shape. Some later traditions call it adamantine, the unbreakable material, and she asked her imprisoned children which of them would do what needed to be done. The Titans lay inside their mother in the darkness, unable to be born, and she held out the gray sickle in the dark and asked who would take it. All of them refused, except the youngest, except Cronus, the sickle and the sea. Cronus took the sickle from his mother's hands in the dark, and when Ouranos descended on Gaia that night, Cronus reached out from where he lay and castrated his own father with the flint blade, throwing the severed part into the sea behind him without looking back. From the blood that fell on the earth, new beings rose. The Furies, who pursued blood crimes across the world forever after, the giants, and the ash tree nymphs. From the severed part that fell into the sea, the white foam gathered and churned, and from it Aphrodite, the goddess of love, stepped onto the shore at Cyprus, fully formed, standing on the waves. Ouranos, bleeding and diminished, withdrew into the sky and became simply the sky, no longer a deity who acted in the world, but a vast cold dome above it, still present, still watching, but no longer a force pressing down on creation. As he left, he spoke one thing to Cronus, a curse, a prophecy, the kind of statement that cannot be unsaid once it has been spoken aloud. A child of Cronus would do to him what he had done to Ouranos. Cronus heard this. He remembered it, and then he took the throne of the cosmos, freed his Titan siblings from inside their mother, and ruled. The reign of the Titans, the age that followed, was called the Golden Age by later poets, and the description is not ironic. Under Cronus and his queen Rhea, his own sister, as was the Titan custom, the world flourished. Human beings, in this telling, lived without toil or illness or war, in a world that simply produced what they needed. They did not age the way the later world would age. They did not suffer the way the later world would suffer. The earth opened and gave, the seasons were gentle, and Cronus ruled the cosmos from his throne at the center of it. But the prophecy had been spoken. The knowledge of it had entered Cronus, and did not leave. When Rhea bore their first child, Cronus took the infant and swallowed it whole. He swallowed Hestia. When the second child came, he swallowed Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. 5 children, 5 swallowings, not dead, not destroyed, because divine beings cannot be simply killed, but trapped inside their father in the dark, unborn again, held the way Cronus himself had been held inside Gaia by a father who feared what he had made. Rhea watched this happen 5 times. The 6th time she was pregnant, she went to her own parents, Gaia, and the now distant Ouranos, and asked what could be done. They told her. She went to the island of Crete, and in a cave on Mount Ida, or Mount Aegaeon, depending on which tradition holds the telling, she gave birth in secret to a 6th child, a son. She wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to Cronus, who swallowed it without looking closely, as a being who expects no resistance eventually stops checking. The stone sat in his stomach with his 5 children, and Cronus continued his reign, satisfied that the prophecy had been answered before it could act. The child born on Crete was raised by nymphs, hidden in the cave, fed on honey and goat's milk, his crying covered by the Cretes, warrior priests who clashed their spears and shields together whenever he wept so the sound would not reach his father's ears. His name was Zeus, the making of a god. Zeus grew in the cave on Crete into something the world had not produced before, a deity formed entirely outside the shadow of the parent who feared him, raised not in a palace but in hiding, not on power but on concealment and patience. When he was grown, he emerged and found an ally, Metis, the Titaness of wisdom and cunning, who would later become his first wife before he swallowed her in the same act his father had used against his siblings. But that is a later story, a grimmer echo of the pattern. For now, Metis prepared an emetic, a substance that would force Cronus to disgorge what he had consumed. Some versions say she disguised it as honey, adding it to the drink she gave him as a cupbearer, a role she assumed through deception. Cronus drank it. He vomited the stone first, the one he had swallowed thinking it was a child, and then, in reverse order from how they had been swallowed, his 5 children came back out of him, fully grown now by divine nature, unchanged by the time inside him, burning with fury and power, and 10 years, or the divine equivalent of 10 years, of enforced darkness. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and standing with them, the son he had never managed to swallow. The 6 children of Cronus looked at their father, and the war began. The Titanomachy, 10 years. The war between the Olympians, Zeus, and his freed siblings, and the Titans lasted 10 years, which in the context of beings who do not die and do not tire means something different than it does for the creatures who later told the story. 10 years of cosmic battle, the kind of fighting that reshapes mountains and drains seas, and leaves the world rearranged when it is finished. The Titans were not merely the older generation. They were enormous in power, deeply entrenched, holding the cosmos that had been theirs for an entire golden age. Most of them sided with Cronus. A few, notably Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus, sided with Zeus. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, having calculated where the war would end before it began. The Olympians held Mount Olympus. The Titans held Mount Othries. Between the 2 peaks, the world shook. The war turned on Zeus, making decisions that his father had specifically prevented. Where Cronus had kept dangerous things imprisoned, the way Ouranos had kept the Titans themselves imprisoned, Zeus released them. He descended into Tartarus, the deepest pit beneath the earth, deeper than the Underworld itself, and he freed the Cyclopes, the 3 one-eyed sons of Gaia and Ouranos, who had been imprisoned there since before the Titans had even been freed. The Cyclopes, grateful, gave gifts to their liberators. To Zeus they gave thunder and lightning, the weapon that would become his defining symbol, the bolt of electricity that could strike anything in creation from the sky above it. To Poseidon they gave the trident. To Hades they gave a helm of invisibility. Then Zeus went deeper still and freed the Cenemanes, the 100-handed ones, 3 beings each with 50 heads and 100 arms, so powerful and so terrible that both Ouranos and Cronus had kept them imprisoned because no cosmos that wanted to remain recognizable could afford to have them loose in it. The Cenemanes, freed from an imprisonment that had lasted since before the Golden Age, fought for Zeus with every one of their 300 combined arms, hurling rocks the size of mountains at the Titans simultaneously in barges that the Titans could not answer. The Titans broke. Cronus and the Titans who had stood with him were bound and cast into Tartarus, into the same pit from which the Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones had been freed, and the Cenemanes, given now a purpose, given the role of jailers rather than prisoners, were set to guard the gates so that the Titans would remain where Zeus had put them. A bronze wall was built around Tartarus. Night was poured around that wall 3 times. Above it the roots of the earth, and the sea pressed down. Atlas, the Titan who had led the armies in battle, not Cronus himself, who in some traditions retreated or was bound early, but Atlas, the most martial of the Titans, received a separate punishment. He was made to hold the sky up on his shoulders for eternity, standing at the western edge of the world, bearing the weight of heaven on his back as the mirror image of the original problem. Where Ouranos had once pressed down from above onto Gaia below, now Atlas was made to press upward from below forever, holding apart the two things that had once been too close together. What was built from the war. After the Titanomachy, the three sons of Cronus divided the cosmos between them. They drew lots for the division. The way soldiers divide the spoils after a battle, the randomness of the draw giving each portion a kind of legitimacy that direct assignment could not. Zeus drew the sky. Poseidon drew the sea. Hades drew the underworld. The earth and Olympus were held in common, belonging to all, and therefore to Zeus, as the eldest of the freed children and the one who had made the liberation possible. This division, sky, sea, underworld, became the structure of Greek cosmology that every subsequent myth was built inside. Every story of gods interfering in human affairs, every divine argument, every act of divine favor or divine punishment happened within a cosmos that was arranged exactly this way because of what had been won in those 10 years on the slopes between Olympus and Athries. But there is something underneath the structure that the architecture of the victory tends to obscure. Cronus did to his children what Ouranos had done to him. He imprisoned what he had made because he feared it, because a prophecy told him that his children would do to him what he had done to his father, and the knowledge of this drove him toward the same behavior that had made his own liberation necessary. The pattern repeated exactly, with one variation. Zeus, raised in hiding, raised outside the shadow of his father's fear, broke the cycle not by being more powerful in the conventional sense, but by doing the opposite of what his father and grandfather had done. Where Ouranos imprisoned, Zeus freed. Where Cronus swallowed to prevent the future, Zeus opened Tartarus and let out what had been locked away before the world was recognizable. The Cyclopes gave him lightning because he released them. The Cendamanes fought for him because he freed them. The most dangerous things in creation, the things that two successive rulers had decided were too threatening to be allowed to exist in the open world, became Zeus's greatest weapons precisely because he was willing to open the gates his predecessors had kept shut. The prophecy that never stops. Ouranos was castrated by Cronus. Cronus was dethroned by Zeus. And Zeus, who had seen the pattern clearly enough to break it in one direction, did not fully escape it in another. He swallowed Metis when an oracle told him that her children would surpass their father, and from that swallowing Athena was eventually born, erupting fully armed from Zeus's forehead, a birth so strange and so violent that it suggests the pattern was not fully broken so much as transformed into something new. The gods who came from the war between Titans and Olympians carried within them the knowledge that power is not permanent, that the ruler of the cosmos is always and already a child of something older than themselves, that every throne in creation was built on top of a previous throne that had to be violently vacated. This is what the Greeks encoded in the story of the Titanomachy, not simply a war between old gods and new gods, but a cosmological argument about the relationship between power and fear, between what a ruler chooses to imprison and what those imprisoned things will do when someone finally opens the gates. The sky is still up there, because Atlas is still holding it. The Titans are still in Tartarus, because the Cendamanes are still at the gates. The lightning still works, because the Cyclopes who made it were freed from a darkness that had held them since before the Golden Age. The whole Greek cosmos is built from decisions made during 10 years of war between two mountains, and the most important decision was not made with a weapon, but with a key turned in the lock of a gate that every ruler before Zeus had been too afraid to open.